Why do we want to invite that?
He says, why do we want to invite that as in regulators? Erik, we're not inviting them. They're coming, right? Like, that's the thing that Sam should have said. Bro, you might want to live in a libertarian utopia, and I would too, okay, as far as crypto goes. But, bro, that's not the world we live in. They're coming. We're not inviting them. They're telling us we're going to crack down on you. So you either give us some proposals and wine and dine us like all the other industries do, or we're gonna crack down hard, and we're not gonna give a damn what you guys think about our regulations. And if we kill your industry, hey, that's not our problem. That's yours. That's what Sam should have said, but Sam didn't say it, right? Like, that's the response. Like, we're not inviting them, bro. They're coming. So we better be ready. And if anything, we better move first before it's too late. Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Bread podcast. Your host David here. I'm doing a little solo episode this week. I didn't have a guest. I have one next week coming up, but wanted to just react to a few things and talk about stuff that happened this week. It was obviously a pretty crazy week, so I figured I'll just go solo. You know, I never really tried going solo. I wanted to try doing a solo podcast for a while, but I didn't. And then I said, why not? What's stopping you, kid? So that's what we're doing today. This is a big week, I guess you could say. Biggest week we've had in a while. Obviously, the headline stealer was Doge, ripped from like, I don't even know. I think it went from like 88 cents to 16 cents, like pretty much doubled, maybe a little over doubled at its peak. Which is pretty nuts and it happened in like a 3-4 day period. Everyone went crazy. Obviously, you had all the Elon buying Twitter stuff. I made a whole video about Doge with my secret conspiracy about what his plans are for Doge. So if you didn't check that out, go to our most recent video and take a look at that. But what's more interesting is what that means for the markets more broadly, because obviously we had a lot of volume come in this week that we haven't had in a while. And, ETH kind of quietly crept back up to over 1,600. It's a little back below now at the time of recording. But the question for me is, after this week, people come with lots of narratives when you have a week like this. Dog season is back, and it was for like a couple days, and, played a few dog coins. And then people start talking when ETH starts moving about this new deflation narrative, which I do think is real. I just wonder if it's too soon. And if people are attributing price movement, right? It's always the question of, do narratives create price action or do narratives follow price action? And I'm more in the camp of narratives tend to follow price action. Now, they can be reflexive, especially in a bull market, meaning that once price action starts and a narrative picks up, that narrative then becomes the reason more buyers come in. But it tends not to be the reason people start buying in the first place. And that's kind of one of the hardest things about narrative trading and investing, is you're trying to guess what is a likely narrative that could pick up, right? And that kind of gets into like, I remember reading a while back, this is like probably a couple years ago, about like this idea of like mimetic resonance, I think is like what this concept is called. I might be making that up, but essentially the idea was that certain things people kind of naturally attached to more than they do others. So like in crypto, for example, dog coins are like on a scale of 1 to 10, of 1 being no mimetic resonance, to 10 being massive. Dog coins are like a 10, right? Because obviously you had Doge itself, and then you had tons of like Shibas and a million other little copycats after Shiba. But it's like a clear thing that has been able to rocket multiple coins into the top 10, and then tons of other follow on, and it continues to like last. So dog coins is something that has a high level of mimetic resonance. So then you ask yourself, like, what else could have mimetic resonance? What is something that could pick up? Another example would be like Bitcoin being digital gold, right? Like that's a classic one. That's one that I feel like has probably died off a reasonable amount now, considering that both Bitcoin and gold are down quite a bit. But these are like the types of things. And so with ETH, you have this deflationary narrative now, right? And ETH has gone through many of its own like narrative cycles. You had originally like the world computer or internet computer or whatever, and then you had ultrasound money was kind of a thing people said last cycle, and now you have this deflationary commodity token. I mean, commodity is probably not the best word for it, but I think you could kind of call it like a commodity in the sense that it's like this thing that people will need in order to use the Ethereum network, and that now with the deflation, people are going to be actively burning it over time, and that creates this structural. If you listen to the last podcast I did with Hal Press, he was talking about how like ETH has this like structural flow now with ETH2 that it didn't have previously. So all these things are interesting. I think it may be a tad soon, though, in my opinion, to start hopping on the narrative wagon, just because we had like a good week and a half, and it was a great week and a half. Honestly, I enjoyed it because it was a rough, like, honestly, September and early October were like not fun for trading altcoins. So it was nice to have like a week or two of fun. But I don't want to get too excited just because made some money in the last 2 weeks that the bull market's back. It's not back. But the question is more like, not so much is it back, but are we kind of beginning the sideways bottom, which is kind of how bottoms tend to form, right? Is like you just trade sideways for a while. I don't know. Obviously, my guess is as good as anyone else's, but I think that we probably do go back down. I still lean bearish just because I think macro is still bad. I don't know how else to put it. I think like the US is a different story. I think the US will be okay, but I still think that the US is going to be possibly making new lows. I don't want to say for sure, but possibly on equities. But yeah, I think that like jumping to narratives too soon is always dangerous. But I will say this: if we see ETH hold above like 1,500 for, I don't know, a few weeks. Obviously, we have midterms coming up. Not next week, but the week after, the Tuesday after, second Tuesday of November. And then we have FOMC meeting next week. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen this first week of November. So we'll see. But if ETH can hold above 1,500, say we're like mid-November and we're still there, that would be pretty promising. That would mean that we may have like a sustained structural flow like people have been talking about with the deflation that will create this ETH deflation narrative, which what you really want with any good narrative is FOMO, and ETH deflation being like, oh, ETH structurally can't go down. Obviously that's not true, but if people believe that, then that's a good FOMO catalyst for people to latch onto and create a narrative. So I would watch these next couple of weeks, see where ETH is at like mid-November, past the midterm potential rally or whatever we have. There's also the possibility that this week the Fed comes in and ruins everyone's day, which is a very, very real possibility. So we'll see. I wouldn't hold your breath here. I personally took profits on most things on Friday, and even this morning I actually was in still a couple dog coin plays and then closed all those up. So certainly manage your risk here. Don't get too excited just because we had a good week. But other things to talk about. I wanted to react to the Sam from FTX SBF versus Erik Voorhees debate that they had. I thought it was really interesting. It was about if people don't know, Sam was working on a bill to put through Congress in the United States about regulating both centralized exchanges and DeFi. And obviously a lot of people were upset because it was pretty harsh on DeFi, especially for Americans. It would make it that essentially anybody like an Aave, for example, and we'll get into the clip in a second, would have to basically be a broker-dealer licensed entity in order to operate in the United States, which kind of is very against the ethos of DeFi. And so they had a bit of a discussion about this, and I wanted to get into that. So I'm gonna grab my headphones. Wanted to react to this real quick. One sec. Okay, I've got it up now. If you're listening to the audio, you're not missing anything. It's just I'm just listening to this clip. But there's a specific part here that I kind of wanted to talk about, because I'm gonna have a little controversial take on this. I know a lot of people were taking Erik's side on this versus Sam, and I'm not totally on either side, but I think people are really quick to jump to the ideologue stance that Erik has versus someone like Sam, who is extremely pragmatic. And I think Erik makes some really good points, and I think Sam probably does go too far, but I think the real answer is somewhere in the middle between these two, as is the case with most things. But anyways, let's get into the clip here.
Certainly the biggest area of contention, both with my own response to Sam's post and with the crypto community at large, is what Sam was saying about DeFi. And I'll try to characterize Sam's position correctly here. He was clear that at a protocol level, things need to remain open and immutable. So that's good. Where he made the big mistake is in suggesting that interfaces for decentralized protocols, such as the front-end website of something like Aave or Uniswap, should perhaps be regulated as a financial institution. That line cannot be crossed. That line should not be crossed. And if we spend the rest of this discussion on this point alone, I think that would be valuable. My main ask of Sam in these discussions is that however important it is to regulate centralized custodians or intermediaries correctly, that the current bill, the DCCPA, trying to do that and doing that well is understandable. If regulations in this same bill get attached to how decentralized products, i.e. non-financial intermediaries, are handled, that is going to be a big mistake. It's going to be done incorrectly, it's going to be done poorly, and it's going to harm America more than it harms the actual protocols themselves. So if I can make any request, it's simply to not include any concept of decentralized finance into a bill which is centrally trying to govern well central controlling intermediaries.
So what he's referencing here is, like I said, that there's back end and front end regulation. That's kind of what they argue about. Like back end being like the protocol itself, like Ethereum, right? I think they both agree that those should be completely decentralized and uncontrolled at the block level. But what Sam was arguing in his bill is that the front ends should be centralized, or at least regulated, where people would need a broker-dealer license in order to operate them. And that was Erik's big contention. So I'll let Sam respond here.
I think that's basically characterized right. And I think one thing I did take a little bit of, and by the way, I'm not sure you're wrong, to be clear on this. Like I think it's a complicated question. I don't fucking know what the right answer is. I think that I think you did characterize, I think, basically right. And I really appreciate that you sort of have put the thought into to make sure that you do that. I don't think everyone does that on either side. One thing that they do just want to note is and I think you're not your first or your third, but your second description of what I think you sort of said that that you think it's important that decentralized applications not be regulated, and I think that they should be, or something roughly like that. And I think that your first and third versions did clarify roughly correctly what I think, but I think the second version sort of blurred a little bit the lines between a decentralized protocol and well, at the very least, and for instance, a centrally hosted GUI. And so I just want to make it clear that I do draw a distinction there. And then I think a lot of the discussion on Twitter failed to remember that distinction, even if it was pointed out periodically. And so I want to make sure that we keep that pretty clear, and that we not sort of drift back and forth about what it refers to. So I don't know for sure what the right thing to do is here. I do not think that we should be trying to hash out a lot of DeFi regulation in DCCPA. I think for most of the reasons you said, this is first of all, a lot of this is just permissionless code, and second of all, it's just a tricky area in general, and those are two recipes for disaster on trying to just quickly cobble together a comprehensive regime for DeFi. I think that the most important thing by far, and I'm interested if you disagree with this, but my instinct is that by far the most important thing is, or set of things, is the following: that protocols can be permissionless, that on-chain code can be permissionless. Sorry, the only reason I'm saying can be here is that it's permissionless to write it, and obviously you could write on-chain code and put permissions in it. We shouldn't make that illegal. But that should be permissionless to write coding, and that code can be permissionless. And that like peer-to-peer transfers and payments can be permissionless. Like those are things that I think are like incredibly important and fundamental here. And I think that like if those are violated, like I think those are sort of the sacred things, because if those get violated, I think it just breaks the whole thing. Like it's like, and by the way, I think it's true, by the way, for centralized, for TradFi too. If you try to say everything is permissioned, no one could go to a shopping mall anymore. Like you could not buy food. Like the world would just starve the next day. So and I think that like the result of that would be to like effectively ban digital commerce and say that like the only unregulated commerce can be physical unregulated commerce. So, but anyway, I want to check if you agree, not with my statement that I think that they should be permissionless, but with my claim that that's the most important thing by far.
Yes, I think I agree with that.
Cool.
I take a little issue with your point about the current payment system not being permissionless, or being permissioned. Like today, it is absolutely permissioned. That you can go with your credit card and buy something at the store is only because several intermediaries have your box ticked as approved, right? That is permissioned, and that can be taken away from people for wrongthink or for anything that some Orwellian government wants to do to them.
Oh, sorry. I think what I'd say is parts of it are permissioned and parts of it aren't. And I think it's totally arbitrary which parts are and aren't. And I think that I agree with you on the parts that are. Like, so you can go to a store and you can pay with a credit card or with a dollar bill. And one of those is intermediated.
Cash is permissionless, right? That's the last bastion there.
That's right. And I think that like, and I do think that, by the way, I think you're making a good point here, which is like when you go to a store and you buy a bagel, it costs 2% to a payment processor. And that's if you're allowed to buy the bagel, right? That's if you have connectivity to financial services. Now you can buy with cash either way, I guess, but cash is a pain. And why does it cost 2%? I think a lot of that is because like you're trying to get like gigantic companies to zoom in and say like Alice wants to buy an everything bagel with cucumber. What do we think about that? And it's like that's fucked. Like that and like that's where that 2% is going effectively, right? That 2% is going because you're trying to mediate like that transaction. And as you said, like not everyone has a credit card and credit cards don't always work. And so that 2% fee is the good case. That's the case where the payment does work. So I agree that like a lot of the fact that payments are screwed up today is because of this. And so anyway, given, she's taking as a given that is the most important thing, that smart contracts, that code, validators is another thing I should have thrown at that, which I assume you agree with, that it's very important that validators can be permissionless. Or else again, you have like 10,000 random people running code to validate mathematical transactions and also think about everything bagels with onions at 7-Eleven and Alice, which is insane. But anyway, so on.
I gotta say real quick, Sam needs to do some speech training, because like he gives these long rambling answers, and like I get what he's saying, like front end regulated, back end, or sorry, but yeah, back end not regulated, and like anyways, Sam, let's make these answers a little more concise, please. Okay, all right.
Maybe I'll say just to clarify, I make explicit a website hosted on a centralized service by an American that targets financial products at American retail, backending onto DeFi, but is non-custodial. And so it's not custodying, which I'm guessing is maybe where you would be drawing this line here.
No, non-custodial. So let's use a specific example, like a US hosted, US owned front end for Aave.
Yep, which is, to be clear, in this case, US hosted, US owned, and offered to Americans. And sure. Offered to Americans is a vague word, but like I sort of want to say like, isn't IP blocking the US or something like that? And like, I don't know, there's lots of interesting details here about that. But like,
the question is, should an American need a license to offer a front end for a back end DeFi protocol like Aave?
Yeah,
your blog said yes.
And sorry, just want to clarify, and it offered to Americans.
Correct. So, to Americans.
Yeah. I want to sidestep for a second so we can get back to the question of whether I think if I were dictator, that should be required.
Sam would love to be dictator. That was a Freudian slip right there.
And rather answer a question of what policy should we be proposing and arguing for? And my core thought here is the following, which is that I claim that the most important thing here, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that smart contracts validators payments remain open and free, and that the most important thing is that that gets protected at all costs, and that because of that, like I am relatively willing to accept compromises if they preserve the things that I believe have the vast majority of the value for DeFi. My best guess, my projection is let's just expand out 10 years from now, and say, what will empirically, in expected value terms, regulation look like for DeFi in the United States, for with all these caveats, again, Americans offering to Americans, blah blah blah. If I had to guess, I would guess in expected value terms that looks worse than it does in a world in which it's like validators, smart contracts, payments totally free, but in which the centralized American-hosted targeting Americans of a GUI requires a broker-dealer license or something like that. Like my projection is that that world is better than the expected value of what the world will be. Maybe I'll just pause for a second there and ask you, do you agree with that statement about the relative expected values?
I think the tendency of the regulators is to make the world a darker place no matter what. Now, it's up to non-regulators. It's up to you, Sam. It's up to people in the industry to highlight the reasons, whether ethical, moral, legal, why those people should not be imposing the controls that they want to impose. And I agree that the protocol being immutable is the most important thing, but I kind of feel like you're starting to compromise far too early. Just as in the same way that, like, if we agree that the heart or the brain is the most important part of the body, we would not so readily surrender our arms and our legs to be chopped off just because the heart may be arguably more important, right? Like, let's keep the whole being here. Let's not invite in.
So to me, that was like the core line that Erik had that I think was the best metaphor, right? He said, what did he say? Heart surgery or brain surgery? I forget. But anyways, like, hey, I know just because I need my heart to function, let's not start chopping off arms because I don't technically need them. But like, hey, life is a lot worse if you don't have an arm, right? Yes. I did think he was straw manning a little bit when he's saying, oh, well, the only reason regulators exist is to make things worse. Listen, I'm not going to be the guy to go out and like defend regulators, but that's a very big straw man. I mean, like, the reality is there are a ton of scams in this space, right? People lose their money all the time. It's not a secret. You have celebrities and athletes and influencers promoting these pump and dump scams, and their followers don't know any better, right? And they buy these things and they lose all their money. So like, let's not pretend that there isn't like real harm that has been done. Now, does that mean that it should be banned or like you're not allowed or anything like that? No, of course not. And like, I lean much more towards like, hey, let's pretty much leave DeFi alone with a few things here and there. But I think that's a very big libertarian talking point. And like, Erik is obviously like a libertarian, that like, oh, the state shouldn't be involved in anything ever. And I also just think that that's not realistic. And really, when you listen to this, what this comes down to is Erik is an ideologue. Erik is he's an OG Bitcoiner, right? Like, he's been around, I don't even know how long, but he's been around for a long time, okay? And Sam is newer to crypto. Obviously, Sam's been around for a while too, but he's newer relative to Erik. And he came in more with like, I'm a trader, I'm here to make money. And yeah, like, hopefully things turn out well for crypto, but like, I want to make money, right? Like, let's just be real. The thing is that I think they're both right. I think that Erik is right in saying, hey, just because we don't need our arm to live doesn't mean that we should just chop it off. But I think Sam is also right in this argument in saying that, hey, like, you can be an ideologue all you want, but there's the reality that if you don't propose something to regulators, they will propose it for you. And I think that's the point that Sam was trying to make, that he didn't really make that well. And I think a lot of people took Erik's side on this. And part of that is because Sam has kind of been painted as a villain recently, which, I mean, hey, I'm not going to argue with it. He's certainly a profit extractor, but let's be real. Most of us are here to extract profit too. If you could switch places with Sam, you would do it. Let's not act like we're all angels here, okay? I think the problem is that, again, Erik is coming from like, let's not give an inch. Let's force them to regulate us instead of like going to them with propositions. And I think, unfortunately, that's not going to work, right? I think that Sam is more right in the sense that, hey, if you like go in, because this is politics, right? We might not like politics in crypto very much, and we might be like very crypto anarchist, libertarian, whatever. But if you want the mass adoption, if you want to operate in the real world, you're going to have to work with people that you don't necessarily want to work with. And you're going to have to do some politicking. And I think that's what Sam is saying. And obviously, Sam has been criticized for this for a while. Obviously, he donated like whatever 25 million to the Biden campaign, and I think there was something that just came out that he's donated like 40 million for midterms or something, just for like in the last like I don't know, few months or year or whatever. And Sam gets that, like, you know, Washington is all about relationships and cozying up to people and lobbying, essentially, right? Like every industry does this, right? You think that bankers aren't lobbying, or any other name your bake industry isn't lobbying Congress on how to craft these bills and regulations for their industry? Of course they are. And Sam is saying that it's foolish to just be like, oh no, we don't want to talk to you guys. We're gonna do our own thing and, you know, cry wolf when you guys come after us. I don't know. Again, like the idealist in me, of course, I want to be with Erik and say, yes, give us this freedom. Let us do whatever we want. Let us trade our shitcoins in peace. But like, there's also the reality of they have the power, right? They have the power to ruin all of this, to end the party if they want to. And so if you're given the choice of ending the party or, you know, maybe having a drink limit, I'd rather have a drink limit, if that's a good analogy, right? I think you get what I'm saying. And that's like the crux of this argument that these two guys are having. And I think Sam just didn't get that point across that well. And again, this is part of like, Sam, you need some speech coaching. I'll go on with you next time, Sam. Have me next to you, okay? All right, let's let Erik keep talking here.
Let's not invite in this kind of restriction. And if they force the restriction, then they'll force it, and history will be the judge of that. But let's not be the ones who invite that in upon ourselves.
So I totally hear you. I want to make an empirical claim, which it might be wrong. And if this claim is wrong, then I change my position on some of this. But my empirical claim is the following. Maybe I'll sort of like lay out my logic here. Step one, most important thing, validators, etc. Step two, I predict that in expected value terms, that compromise is better than what we will get. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it'll be worse, but like it's better than what we're expected to get because it preserves the most important thing. And I'm not 100% sure that that will be preserved. I really hope it will be. Step three, I think we have to fight to make sure it gets preserved. I think that's the most important fight. And then step four, and I think this is an important and non-trivial stuff that I might be wrong about, but which is very relevant for my thinking on this, is my sense is that it is much more effective at getting what you want the most if you come to the table with a stance which is immediately recognized as willing to compromise and reasonable. And that's I'm not yet making a statement about what matters or what the right thing to do is, but that like my belief is that like if you come to the table in DC and ask for exactly everything that you want as your first ask in a very forceful way, you will not get what you want, and that you will not be taken as seriously, and that the way to maximize the odds of getting what you want the most is to express a willingness to compromise on the things that are less important. That is a belief.
That in principle.
That's exactly it. Like Sam is basically saying, without saying it, and he tweeted this. I think he deleted the tweets where he kind of was a little snarky after the fact. I'm not sure if people saw it, where he basically tweeted, because obviously he sees the reaction to this podcast and everybody was siding with Erik, and Sam said, okay, you guys have fun. You guys want to deal with the regulators? You go for it. He goes, and he said something snarky to Erik, like, you know, let me know how all your connections in DC like work out, right? Basically saying that you have none. And Sam is saying, I know how these people operate. If you come to the table saying, I want an all or nothing approach and I'm not willing to compromise, that they're just going to tell you to fuck off, right? It's like that simple. And Sam is saying, we have to compromise with these people. You might not want to, but at the end of the day, this is the United States, right? They are the global empire, whether we admit it or not. They're incredibly powerful, and they're not just going to give up their status of control over the financial industry that easily. And that's what Sam's trying to say without directly saying, because obviously he can't necessarily say that because, you know, his his pals in DC will see that. But that's what he's saying. He's saying these people will screw you if you don't compromise with them. So let's compromise with them so that our industry doesn't get screwed. Like that's what he's saying. And Erik is like, well, let's be idealist about this. And again, I think it's somewhere in the middle. I'm not totally with Sam. I think Sam went a little too far. But again, his point of saying you have to propose something or they'll propose it for you. Like that's the ultimate point. So let's keep going.
Well, that's absolutely right. You're not wrong on that principle, but you're sacrificing far too much from our position here. Let's be pragmatic for a second. Forget all principles and everything. If DeFi front ends catering to Americans need to be licensed, DeFi in America dies. It dies. People will not use DeFi through licensed front ends because it will simply look like CeFi. There will be no meaningful distinction.
So
that can't be sacrificed.
Well, I think I disagree with that, but I more strongly disagree with at least one of the things you said, even if I don't know which one. Like, in other words, I don't know that you can simultaneously think what you just said and also think that by far the most important thing is that validators, et cetera, remain permissionless. Like, because what you're saying right now is you lose the whole thing if you give up permissionless front ends. And but then you also said that you get most of the value if you have like permissionless backends. And so I think I'm now confused about which of those you think.
If you gate the way that people use DeFi, 99% of people use DeFi, which is through a GUI. If you gate that as a licensed financial institution, you have turned DeFi into TradFi.
And so just to clarify it then, like the sense of
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think this is where Sam got caught. And if he could go back, I'm sure Sam would have a better answer. I don't think that's necessarily true. I agree. I don't want you to have a license to run a DeFi front in the United States. I do not want that. I think that's a bad thing. But to say that DeFi is dead, if that were the case, even if the protocols themselves remain completely permissionless, I think is misleading. I think that's not true.
What I'm getting now is basically that you think that like the front end is just about as important as the back end. That like, if you, for instance, had to like if you got like 70-30 odds on like which was permission and which was permissionless, you'd be kind of like, I'll just take whichever gives me the 70%. Like I kind of think about equally important. Like, is that kind of how you're thinking about this?
I'm thinking of this from the perspective of actually wanting the entire world to be able to use an open, immutable financial system. And 99% of those people use GUIs. So if you gate the access to permissionless blockchains with GUIs that need financial regulation on them, we failed. Like we end up with TradFi.
I feel confused about whether you agree with my statement.
What am I missing?
Okay, but that's also not true because here's the thing. There's kind of like, when we talk about financial regulation, we should probably define it a little better. There's like multiple aspects to financial regulation, right? The core of it, the number one thing is the monetary supply control, right? I would argue that is by far the most important thing. And that's the thing that obviously, the U.S. will never give up willingly, right? They will never give up dollar hegemony willingly. And so what Sam is saying, that in the sense of like, let's use Ethereum, for example, that not having any governmental control whatsoever over Ethereum, the chain, is more important than the front end. And I think that's like impossible not to agree with, because if you disagree with that, then you're saying like, okay, well, we can have decentralized front ends, but like, oh, they can now control the supply of Ethereum. They can now choose which blocks are approved and not. Like, the front end doesn't matter at that point, right? Because they can just do it at the blockchain level. So I think that is not true. I think Erik is being a little disingenuous here. But with that said, like, yeah, obviously, it sucks if you have to KYC to use DeFi. I don't want that, and I don't think most people want that. And I think it sucks if you have to, like, the compromise I would be willing to make, and I think people are going to be upset with this maybe, but personally, the compromise I would be willing to make is, if you want to run a DeFi operation in the United States, you do need a license, but the users do not have to KYC, right? Like that's the compromise I would be willing to make. And this is back to when I was saying the types of financial regulation. So type 1 is like the core of it, the monetary supply, the control of it, right? The block level, right? In crypto terms. The other part of it is like the surveillance and monitoring and all that stuff. So like we didn't always have KYC and AML and all this stuff, right? Like you used to have, like he was saying before, like cash is kind of the last bastion of freedom that you have in the traditional monetary system, and that's kind of dying out. But if you just use cash, like it's kind of a pain. But if you decide like I'm not using any credit cards or banks or whatever, I'm gonna keep money in under my mattress and pay for everything in cash, you can totally do that. And yes, the government controls the monetary supply, but like they can't track what you're doing very easily at all. So what I am saying is that like controlling the monetary supply and controlling the surveillance, let's call it, are kind of two separate things. And I think what Sam is saying, we should never give up the monetary supply controls part. But maybe we have to give a little flexibility on the surveillance part, because ultimately they want to be able to make sure people are paying their taxes. They want to make sure there's no money laundering and illegal activities. And you can argue, oh, people use the dollar. I agree. I agree with all the arguments. I think that there's a ton of straw man arguments about how crypto is bad and cash is good and it's stupid. But ultimately, again, like you're dealing with people who have all the power and we have none. So you have to find the compromise somewhere. So like, I think the ideal compromise, not ideal, but a good, reasonable compromise is if you want to operate a DeFi protocol in the United States, or I should say, I'm sorry, the front end, right? That you need a license, but you do not have to get the information of all your customers, right? I think that's like a reasonable compromise, because that prevents like the number one thing, which is people, scammers, running these things anonymously and stealing a bunch of people's money and getting away with it, right? Because if they have to have a license to do that, then it's much harder to get away with that. But then it doesn't hurt the users who like now you're being tracked on every single thing you're doing, right? I think that's a reasonable compromise. And I think if that were the end goal, like Sam was saying, like 10 years from now, I think that's a reasonable place to be. Is it the most ideal? No. But is it better than like, oh no, you need KYC to use DeFi. Oh, and we're censoring blocks at the block level. No, like that's a terrible outcome. And Sam is basically saying, I'm trying to avoid that here. And anyways, I think I made my point. So we'll keep going.
Sorry. I'm not trying to, I know what you think the best case is here. I know what you think the worst case is here. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, is an intermediate case closer to the worst case or the best case? Like if you have a case,
this is the intermediate case. My best case is that governments leave free sovereign individuals alone to interact economically as they will, like the country was supposed to be founded on. But that is a radical notion that no one in Washington accepts anymore. Granted.
Sure. So sorry. So if you take, of the following three cases, granted that there are many cases beyond these three, but of the following cases, case one, all of DeFi and things related to DeFi are unregulated. Case two, back-end unregulated, front-end, centralized front-end regulated. Case three, back-end regulated, centralized front-end regulated. Do you think case two is closer to case one or case three?
I think it's closer to case three.
Got it. So you think that basically, like, if anything here requires oversight, that that you've lost most of the value.
I think we need to move the conversation up a level and acknowledge that the oversight in DeFi already exists, and it's done by immutable code that operates perfectly as written. It has oversight.
Sorry, right? I agree. Oversight from a human-based financial regulator in the government.
Why do we want to invite that?
I'm not making an argument about whether I think it's good or bad. What I'm saying is, and maybe you dispute that we have to choose because maybe you think that like it is fairly likely that we end up in a world in which there is no human regulatory oversight of anything related to DeFi. And if you think that that's an interesting belief, which is not my belief, but which like would be very interesting to me if you thought it was true.
There's
okay. Again, this is where, oh man, this sucks. I think Sam should like, I don't know, they should do this again. Because what Sam should have said there, because let's listen back what Erik said there. That was a little like, come on, bro. Hold on.
The government.
Why do we want to invite that?
He says, why do we want to invite that as in regulators? Erik, we're not inviting them. They're coming, right? Like, that's the thing that Sam should have said. Bro, you might want to live in a libertarian utopia, and I would too, okay, as far as crypto goes. But bro, that's not the world we live in, okay? If you want to leave the United States and live on some island somewhere, which to be fair, Sam kind of did with the Bahamas, but that's a different point. They're coming. We're not inviting them. They're telling us we're going to crack down on you. So you either give us some proposals and wine and dine us like all the other industries do, or we're going to crack down hard, and we're not going to give a damn what you guys think about our regulations. And if we kill your industry, hey, that's not our problem. That's yours. That's what Sam should have said. But Sam didn't say it, right? Like, that's the response. Like, we're not inviting them, bro. They're coming. So we better be ready. And if anything, we better move first before it's too late. That's what Sam should have said.
We end up in a world in which there is no which is not
human oversight over these things. Fraud is already illegal. Theft is already illegal, right? It doesn't matter if I do it through a DeFi smart contract. If I steal from someone, that's regulated already.
Sorry,
right?
I hear you. Okay, I feel like we're being a bit pedantic here, but I will go with the flow, and I will like add a lot of words to the sentence. But I think you know what I'm trying to ask, and I'd appreciate it if you ask the question you know I'm trying to ask. So
you can see Sam is like clearly frustrated that Erik is like being so idealist, but he just doesn't have like a good response.
Is your belief that if any part of the flow by which many people currently access DeFi, in which you go to a American human hosted website aimed at Americans, hosted on AWS, paid for with a credit card, that then backends onto Aave in a non-custodial way, that if any part of that requires an explicit license from a government financial regulator, that already means we're close to the worst case in absolute value. And that like it's not worth that much to talk about which parts of it do and don't require a license, because if any of them do, it's already like sort of like you've already lost the basically the whole war. Is that roughly what you think?
Yes. I think if that is the outcome, then none of us should be proud of anything that we've been doing to build this whole industry. The entire point of this is open, permissionless finance. And when we say that, it is not just a slogan, it is the entire point. And if you exclude 99% of people from open, permissionless finance, then all you've done is make a more complicated, more expensive TradFi system, right? So that's not acceptable to me, and I think to most of the people that care about why we're doing this in the first place.
I think I disagree with your last statement about exactly how it's acceptable to and not. Although maybe I also think maybe it would be if it was phrased the way you phrased it. Okay. I think I now understand your view here. And your view here. Tell me if this is right or wrong. But my understanding now of your view here, roughly speaking, is that, and I think I understand why my previous question didn't get at this, and sorry for that. I now think your view is, roughly speaking, that if anything in this process requires a financial license, then that means that the people, so to speak, won't be able to access it, as that means we've already lost. And that
yes, just as if we were having this discussion 25 years ago when the web was being created, and we were taking these same positions, and you were asking me if any part of the web stack that lets someone log onto a web browser and access something as powerful as the entire tome of human knowledge like Wikipedia, if any part of that required a license, would we have lost the battle? Yes. Yes, the web would not be the beautiful thing that it is today. The reason that it is so special, the reason that it is so innovative, the reason it's so dynamic is because people do not need permission to access the web, to read to it, to write to it. And it's amazing that that has lasted. And anyone who researches the history of the web knows that these very same battles and discussions and debates happened back in the 90s. It would be the height of irony if crypto entrepreneurs then gave up that very same argument 25 years later and allowed finance itself, which is no more dangerous than information, to become a permissioned system.
Okay, I hear you. I hear your point here. And
okay, one crucial thing though is he is talking about there's two conversations. There's the user and there's the operator. And I think what Sam is more saying is that the operators are likely going to have some type of regulation, right? This is going to happen whether we like it or not. So it's just a matter of how do we craft that regulation so that it's the best possible outcome, or in his, as he said, like the most high EV outcome, right? What Erik is saying is that like users shouldn't need a license to access DeFi. I agree. I completely agree. But I think we need to really differentiate these two things, right? In the same way that like users on the internet and companies on the internet are like, it's just very different things. So I think we should make that distinction. Let's keep going.
I have a lot of empathy for it. I think it's like, I think that there is a totally plausible argument to be made here, which you're making, that like any amount of if anywhere in this process we're requiring a license, then in practice, the worry is basically in practice, no one's gonna be able to access it. And that
in
like
practice, it's no longer an open financial system. You've lost that. So if you're okay with losing that, if you're okay with having a closed permission financial system, then we see things very differently.
So I guess I don't see things in binary. Like, I guess what I would.
Okay. That's the point, right? Sam said it. I don't see things in binary. And Erik says, neither do I. But you do, because all the arguments you're making are binary. You're saying if there's any form of permissions in this, anywhere in the stack, that it's no longer like we've failed, right? That's what he says. We failed as an industry. Again, ideally, yes, I want an open, permissioned, anybody can use it system, of course. But there's the practicality of the world we live in. And it's like, I don't know why Sam isn't saying this. It's very frustrating. It's like, yeah, but that's not possible, right? That's not going to happen. Not so long as we live under this current political regime, whatever you want to call it, right? It's not going to happen. So like if that's off the table, if the binary outcome of purely decentralized or 100% regulated, like obviously that's the worst case scenario, but the pure option is off the table, what's the highest EV is what he said, right? Or the best possible outcome next to that, right? And that's where I think, again, like it's frustrating that Sam didn't more clearly just like respond like this.
That felt like a very binary statement.
It's a statement of a line. It's a statement that if we cross this line, we've lost permissionlessness, which is the entire point.
But I don't think permissionlessness is binary. Like, I think that there are shades of gray here, and that you're sort of sweeping that a little bit under the rug, and that like the real answer is that like I think there are costs to losing this line. But I also think that like that doesn't mean that you've lost everything. I think that like in particular, sorry, maybe be more explicit here. I think that if you end up in a position where if you end up in a position where it's licensed to deploy a smart contract or to interact with a smart contract with code, that puts a gear in the works that is very difficult to overcome. Like I think then you just get like on-chain stuff just doesn't work. Like it's just like you can no longer. Yeah, so we agree on that statement. And so on that side, I think I feel maybe somewhat similarly to your sort of sense of like, you know, that sort of it's very difficult to find ways to mess with that don't break the whole thing. I think I don't feel nearly as strongly about the thing I said. So I think that like if what you're saying is that an American hosted GUI aimed at American retail hosted in a centralized way on a centralized cloud server requires some sort of financial licensure, I don't think that basically breaks DeFi. Like, and I think there are a lot of reasons that I don't think it does. I think that I think that like, you know, thinking through like okay, like what impact does that actually have? Like, well, you know, I guess like.
I mean, I can make this very practical. If a company needs to be licensed and do KYC to operate its American front end for Aave, that company now has a compliance program. That company has registered in a certain jurisdiction. That company is now taking personally identifiable information from millions of users and storing it. There is nothing decentralized about that model. That is a centralized model that is endangering people with custodianship. That is TradFi. That is not DeFi.
So I think, sorry, that model, meaning that company, but some other parts of this stack are still definitely decentralized. Not everyone's going to be accessing it through that protocol. So if nothing else, I think like, it's I like other smart contracts aren't going to be accessing it through that portal, for instance. Like that's a big deal. I think that like you can still have things just building on each other in every direction, which is super cool. I think other countries can have different regimes, which is super important. I think that like America can still freely contribute IP and products. And on top of all of that, I don't even agree that company is definitely taking PII. Like I think that like many of them would be, but like I think I could do.
When he says PII there, he means like personal information, and I agree. Right? You can have companies need a license to operate without also, so that you're saying, hey, if you want to operate, right, and you want to like essentially have access to people's money, then we need to know who you are, because we don't want you running off with it and scamming people. I think that's not like the craziest ask, right? Like, I mean, if you want to register a company today, right, anybody who has a LLC or anything, you're like, yeah, you need to give your information to the government. Okay, that's how it works. Now, again, if you want to live in an anarchist libertarian state, that's fine, but that's not the world we live in. So saying like I'll give an example. Pre 2008, the laws around hedge funds were, or any type of like fund, were much more lax than they are now. Right now, hedge funds have to disclose quarterly all of their holdings, right, to their investors and to the public. So you can go and like see this. There's public databases. You have to disclose all of this, right? Prior to 2008, you didn't have to do that. And then what happened in 2008 that caused that? Well, you had guys like Bernie Madoff take advantage and run these complete Ponzi schemes that cost a ton of people money because he was lying about the things he owned, right? And the money he was managing. It was just like a black box and nobody could see inside of it. And now that's not the case. If you run a hedge fund in the United States, you have to say quarterly, like what you bought and sold or what you invested in, whatever, right? You have to disclose those things. I think that's reasonable, right? If you're managing other people's money, to have some form of disclosure of what you're doing with that money. That doesn't mean that like, and I don't think anyone in the hedge fund industry is like really upset with that, right? I mean, there might be a little bit, but like, hey, it also helps your industry in the terms of like your customers are much more okay with trusting you with their money because they're like, okay, well, at least I can see this and there's more transparency, so I'm probably not going to get scammed, or the odds of me getting scammed are lower. And so I think saying that you need a license in the United States to operate a front end of a DeFi protocol is not a crazy thing. That doesn't mean that you also have to collect the personal information and KYC and all that of all your users. I think those are two different things. And Erik, again, kind of just assumes those are together. And that's fair. I'm not saying that regulators aren't going to try to get that. I think what Sam is saying, like, if we come to the table with a compromise and saying, hey, we are willing to compromise on like, okay, you need a license to operate, but you don't need a license or like personal information to use it. That's like a decent outcome. And that's what Sam's saying here.
Describe a system to you that I think would probably get there on a regulatory context without the company taking any PII, which I think is a little bit of a side point, except to say that like I think there's a lot more nuance to this than what you're saying, right? Like let's say that you had on-chain, you had some people KYC'd for other purposes with some company. That company wrote out on-chain, this person's address is KYC'd, not saying anything else about them other than that I've KYC'd them and given them a check mark. And then this front end only let addresses in that list interact with it. Then this GUI is not taking any PII while doing so, right? And again, that's like a little bit of an in the weeds point, but like I think that's just like true of a lot of the things relevant to this GUI thing. And so I guess I just like think this is in practice has a lot fewer of the downsides than you do, although I think it still has downsides. Like I'm still concerned about it. Like I'm not.
So Sam, just to take a higher level point, because you do think it still has downsides and you would prefer a system that didn't make this compromise. One question I think I would have for you, and maybe like Erik or the crypto community is also asking the same thing, is like, so why are we being forced into this choice now? Like, so to use Erik's example from the 1990s, why not come back when our regulators understand DeFi a little bit better, when our market share and education around the US populace or different jurisdictions around the world is a little bit stronger, people have seen the practical use cases. Why can't we sort of strive for the best and have regulation that goes into effect remain silent on? Why?
Okay, well, that's kind of a stupid statement, and I'm sorry, Bankless, but like, I like you guys, but that was a dumb statement. Why don't we just wait until they understand it better? Regulators are not going to like take the time to really understand that better. That's abundantly clear. They have a million. If you're talking about like one thing people don't understand why we even have lobbyists in the first place is because if you're a senator, okay, in the United States, there's 100 of them, okay, and they're like tasked with making all the laws for all the land, or at least at a federal level. And there's so many industries and people and social problems and international problems that they have to like know about, that it's impossible for them to have like a really detailed understanding about every single little thing. And so like one of the reasons lobbying exists, whatever your thoughts on lobbying are, doesn't mean there's no corruption. There certainly is like, well, you need people from those industries to educate the lawmakers, right? In the same way that like, yeah, we need people from crypto to go educate the lawmakers on how to write the laws, because they're not going to like know all the nuances of crypto. Just like they don't know, you think like Ted Cruz or fucking Nancy Pelosi, she's a congresswoman, but rep, but same thing. You get my point. Like you think they know all the nuances of like corn agriculture and also all the nuances of encryption technology and all the nuances of like how our banking system works? No, of course not. Like they need people to help them. And that's no different with crypto. So like, no, you can't just wait for them to learn more about it. They're just gonna, because the other part is like, crypto has such bad PR with all these scams and all this stuff that happens and people losing their money. And like, if you go ask the average person on the street, like, do you think crypto's a scam? Like, I guarantee you more than half of them will be like, oh yeah, it's definitely a scam. Like, yeah, pump and dump, whatever, right? So no. And like, that's who these lawmakers are going to respond to, is their constituents like complaining, or they're hearing about people like losing money and they're like, we need to stop these scammers. And even if it's for a stupid political PR victory that they're like, we took down these scammers and it doesn't really do anything, they don't care, right? They don't care about hurting an industry if it makes them look good. So no, you can't leave it up to the lawmakers to come to you. You've got to go to them. All right.
Isn't it enough to just...
Sam, let me host your next debate, okay? Hit me up, dog.
Do the CeFi regulation. Why do we have to, why are we forced into this position of terrible compromise if what we want is the outcome where we don't have to make this user interface compromise?
So I don't think I'm arguing for us to try to make that happen. Like I think that's misrepresenting pretty grossly what my position is. And I feel like I've never said that. And I feel like that, I don't know, like what I've said is that like, empirically, it might turn out to be the case that this is true. And I have implied that that might be a compromise that we could live with. But I'm not saying that we should make that happen. And I think that, like, I'm not saying that that's the same thing DCCPA does. You know, I think that, like, I'm not saying that we go and make it our priority to make that happen. Like, those, I think, would be probably not the right tactics. I think what I am saying is that, you know, when asked by a regulator, would I think that that was appropriate? I think what I would say is that the most important thing was to keep smart contracts, validators, payments decentralized, and that like if that did mean that, like, you know, essentially hosted front ends by American targeting American retail had to be licensed, I think that could be reasonable. I think that that's like a little bit of a different statement, which
Sam,
is that.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off here, but if the question was, let's acknowledge that the email protocol will be permissionless as a protocol, but every email front end requires licensure and KYC so that we can make sure no one's sending communications with terrorists. Where would your position on that question be?
So, okay, so first of all, I think that's not quite the right comparable. I think that sounds more like payments to me than
we're just talking about emails here, right? Like the sending of messages across the web. If the protocol was going to be immutable and no one would have to put any sort of censorship in the protocol of email, but it was the law of the land in America that every email front-end provider required KYC from its users. Because under the justification that we do not want people sending information back and forth with terrorists. Where would you stand on that position?
Oh, I'd be strongly against that position.
Why?
Why would I be against it? Because I think it'd be like against freedom of speech. I think it'd be disenfranchising a lot of people. I think I would not trust in practice that it would do a good job of sorting people. I think that like the gains from it are relatively small and the risks of it are massive. And I think it would also just introduce a ton of friction everywhere. So I agree with you on all of that. I think that like, and sorry, this is
Why is
I don't
money
know
different?
I don't know how compelling you're going to find this. One thing I will say is that like I'm making a distinction here between, for instance, payments versus like derivatives contracts, and that like it's email feels to me more like payments. So I think that like well, it's weird because I'm not sure exactly what the equivalent of derivatives contracts is in the email paradigm, or there's the like messaging paradigm or something. But like you know, I think that like that is one of the reasons that I do think that I'd be very worried about a world in which we ended up with like every payment ever being permissioned. I think that would be crazy and untenable.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it there. That was the clip that went viral, and someone on Twitter put it to like the Curb theme music at the end, where it's like, oh, that was Erik's gotcha moment of saying, well, email is open and permissionless. Imagine if you had to like KYC to use email, or you had to like have a license to operate an email provider, and they were tracking all the communications between all of email. Okay, here's why it's not the same. And here's why Sam is kind of getting to that when he says like feels like more like payments than derivatives contracts, and he's saying like that's not a good comparison. Saying why is an email regulated and financial instruments are? Because if an email operator messes up, the loss is minimal. If a financial institution messes up or runs away with your money, you're fucked. That's the difference. That they can steal your money. Like, that's a huge difference. Like, yeah, obviously there's information within emails that can be compromising, but for most people it's not. And the idea that like email and money are the same, it's not. It's just not. Money and information are not the same thing. I know that people will say that, but that's not true, right? Money has a store of value component to it, whereas information does not. That's a huge difference, and it's such a bad comparison, and I can't believe Sam didn't go harder against that comparison. I think it's apples and oranges. It's just bad. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I get what he's saying and like, oh, what if, back then we did that? I agree. And I agree with what Sam said. That would be a violation of freedom of speech, in the same way that like you can't just tap people's phone calls without a warrant, right? You can't get access to people's emails without a warrant either. But it's a very different thing to say that we need to have licensed operators for financial front ends, where the risk is those people could find ways to steal money, right, if they were anonymous, and get away with it much more easily than if they were licensed and the government knew who was operating those front ends. That's the difference, right? So to say those same things, it's like the risk is just lower. Like, I don't understand what's so complicated about this. And again, like, this is just a case where I think Erik just was like, it's just a better debater. I don't know if Erik has done I know Erik, I've seen Erik do like debates in the past when I first got into crypto, like in 2017 or whatever. But I think maybe Erik is just a better debater than Sam, because Sam should have just said, that's a stupid comparison. That's your answer. And here's why. But he didn't do that. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here because it's kind of going in circles at this point of like, idealism is great, but you have to be pragmatic. There's the world you want to live in, and there's a world we actually live in. And maybe, I think, with a crypto-enabled future, we can move towards the world we want to live in. But that's not a reality right now. And the reality is that within the next few years, if not even sooner, they are going to crack down. And so it's a matter of, are we going to soften the blow that they're going to try to give to us? Or are we just going to say, no, we're idealists, and any type of regulation is complete failure? That's up for you to decide. Those are my thoughts. Again, I wish Sam had gone a little harder. I think Sam was more in the right here. I think a lot of people in crypto are very upset with Sam. Rightly or wrongly, again, I think a lot of it's very hypocritical of traders to call Sam a villain when he's just better at taking people's money than they are, if we're just being real here. So anyways, those are my thoughts. I'm sure a lot of you are going to be upset with me for this, but hey, I wanted to put it out there. And, if Sam and Eric want to host another round 2, and I'll moderate, and I'll make both sides clarify their opinions a little better and avoid straw mans, then I would happily do so. All right, I'm going to wrap up the podcast here. I was going to cover a few more things, but I'm already going longer than I thought on this point, and I think this was kind of a good conversation to have anyway. So let me know your thoughts. I mean, I'm very open to hearing what people have to say, and tell me why you think I'm wrong. If you think that there is a way that we can get through this the ideological way, I would love to hear it. I just don't personally think it's practical. I think you have to, unfortunately, sometimes look at things through the Machiavellian lens, even if it's not the thing that makes you feel warm and fuzzy. It's the thing that works. And politics is Machiavellian, and I think that's what Sam is trying to say. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching or listening. I will see you next time.